Hello and welcome to the Crypto Morning News. I'm your host, Taylor. Fear and greed ticks back down into extreme fear as the Fed week begins. We're going to be covering what to expect this week from the Federal Reserve. 25 basis points are still very likely. I'll tell you exactly how likely here in just a moment. But before we get into it, make sure that you are liking and subscribing this video. Let's go ahead and jump on into the morning sentiment here. Fed week has begun, and it is 94% likely, 94% likely that they are going to cut in December. And there's a lot more buzz around this cut. It is not just the cut itself, but it's also other things that are going to be coming up on my screen. Is the Japanese uh, on the other side of the world, the Japanese are actually expecting to hike. So just a bit of a juxtaposition there, a bit of a contrast. 90% likely that the Bank of Japan actually hikes rates, but right now it is almost 95% likely that we will actually see a cut from the Federal Reserve. But it doesn't stop there because there's more speculation on what exactly is going to happen with the Fed. Bank of America on the Fed's meeting, they just put this out today. They expect a 25 basis point cut in addition to announcements of the reserve management repurchase and term repo operations. So that is essentially, not QE, right? That's we're not going to add uh, assets to our balance sheet, but we're going to do reverse management purchases. Sounds a lot like adding to the balance sheet and term repo operations. So there's a lot to be kind of excited about as a bull, as someone who's exposed to risk assets, whether it be Microsoft, Bitcoin, or Ethereum. But let's keep chugging here. Ex New York Fed repo guru Mark Cabana of now he's working over at Bank of America says Powell could announce a 45 billion per month treasury bill purchase this week, along with the announcement of a rate cut and potentially some of these other things that Bank of America is predicting. Mark Cabana, not to be confused with Mark Cuban, Mark Cabana is thinking that $45 billion of QE could essentially be on the table, and they could be announcing that as soon as this week, and that could potentially go into effect in January. I would say that is not baked into the market. I think that there have been some announcements that kind of point to this of what Mark Cabana is kind of predicting here, but I don't think that the broader risk market has baked in that we would see QE, formal QE, in January. All right, so I think that one thing to realize though is the market is kind of expecting fireworks from the Fed, right? And if we don't get fireworks, if we don't get a big, money printer meme from Jerome Powell, maybe the market kind of reprices to the downside by this time on Friday, right? So that's something to keep in mind, right? If the kids are expecting a pool party and all they get is just grandma coming over for their birthday, right? Maybe that's not going to go so well. So remember those dynamics. However, as of Monday, December 8th, we're bullish. We're getting bullish headlines across the ticker. Moving along here, last week was actually pretty decent for digital assets. ETFs pulled in 716 million last week, lifting total assets to 180 billion, still below the 264 billion all-time high. So overall, though, this is generally pretty bullish. Seeing some statistics you'd need to see for the crypto bottom to be confirmed, and for investors to not have any choice but to jump in and avoid being left behind. We have some bullish vibes, but that's our main focus. Everything I've discussed so far, the ETF inflows, the speculation, kind of the projections, more rather from Bank of America for what we can expect this Fed week. Bullish vibes. Saylor announced Strategy added 10,600 Bitcoin this week. That's just under $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. So that is a very significant amount. Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin describes need for on-chain gas futures market. Interesting there. That would bring a lot of activity, a lot of transactions to the chain, I would imagine. France's third largest bank will start offering Bitcoin and other crypto trading from Monday. So another another big player coming to the table, going to bring more on-chain activity, more than likely there as trading becomes available to their clients. SEC ends its 2-year investigation into Ondo, clearing the path for U.S. expansion in tokenized assets. We'll camp out there for a second. Let's go read what Ondo had to say on this subject. This was their post. The SEC has formally closed a confidential Biden-era investigation into Ondo without any charges. The inquiry began in 2024, focused on whether Ondo's tokenization of certain RWA complied with federal securities law, as well as whether the Ondo token was a security. The investigation came during a period of aggressive scrutiny for digital asset firms, when Ondo's rapid growth in tokenization treasuries made it one of the earliest and most visible innovators in the category. Against this backdrop, Ondo never wavered from its core conviction, tokenizing some of the safest and most established assets in global finance, U.S. treasuries. Yet this outcome is nevertheless an important milestone for the entire tokenization economy. Regulators are shifting from enforcement-first approaches toward frameworks that support modernized market infrastructure. The SEC is openly engaging with industry to unlock the promise of tokenization for U.S. capital markets. U.S. infrastructure is evolving to support the category. Ondo's acquisition of Oasis Pro Markets is also detailed here. The path is now clearer than ever for tokenized treasuries and tokenized equities to become core components of the U.S. capital markets. The future of global finance will be on-chain, and Ondo will help lead the transition. On February 3rd in New York of next year, we'll share the next phase of our roadmap at the Ondo Summit, where we are bringing together leading regulators, policy makers, and executives across traditional finance to lay out the vision. So big bullish post there for Ondo. Did their price move? Yes. It was up as much as I think I saw 7.2% this morning. So that was a good move for Ondo. Maybe I'll check out the price here in just a little bit. But that is good. That's good for Ondo, right? Good for Ondo. President Trump to approve $12 billion in aid to farmers hit by tariff policies. Now, not to be, cynical, the farmers definitely need that, but this is not quantitative easing, right? But this is stimulus. This is the federal government writing a check to the private markets. So keep that in mind. That is $12 billion that was not in the private sector yesterday. That is now. Look ahead. December 9th, we get the jobs report. Comes just before the FOMC. So there could be some turbulence there if that jobs report may, convince some investors that the Fed won't cut. But I'm here to tell you, the Federal Reserve is likely going to cut, and much more. So let's just let's keep our heads on straight here, folks. I will go to the poly market spread here for the Federal Reserve. Haven't shown you all this yet. 94% likely currently is the spread there that we will see a 25 basis point cut. 6% say no change. 1% say 50 basis points. We do get a CEP this time. We don't get a CEP with every decision. CEP is the summary of economic projections. That is going to include the dot plot. All right, so we'll get a refresh of what the Fed members are seeing for inflation, for interest rates into the future. Obviously, December 10th, Wednesday of this week, is the FOMC decision. And then the last thing I have here for look ahead is Supreme Court ruling on tariffs. We don't have a date on that, but that is going to probably rock markets one way or another once that comes out. Asia market was mixed. The Japanese Nike continued to add, and the Hong Kong index was down 1.2% there. Let's go ahead and jump over to the Bitcoin charts. I'm here on Arrow looking at a pretty zoomed out chart, and this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and look at Bitcoin, though. I'll bring these prices over so you can see them. And there you go. There's Bitcoin. Before I do any kind of analysis, I want to check in on the comments and see how things are going. I do these live every weekday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So if you're finding some value from this, subscribe and also smash the like button, and YouTube will ping this to you so that you don't miss a single episode. Yori said good morning, and Yori's almost always the first comment, so you got to give it up for Yori. Much appreciated there. Jagger said good morning. Vicky Phillips said good morning. Kenny G said GM fam. Ken Monster said GM. Warrior said Ondo to the moon, maybe. All right, we'll see. We'll see, Warrior. We've been bullish on Ondo for a while, says Kenny. That's true. Ondo had a big unlock in January. Had a big unlock. Yeah, unlocks in the past, especially that far in the past, are bullish because as long as the price didn't completely tank, the buyers are continuing. The bulls are staying at the table. Mr. Ratchet Burns, isn't Ondo creating their own chain? If they do, what happens to the current chain? Interesting. Those are technical questions I don't know the answer to right now. Yori said, thanks, man. I always find the content you put out really useful. Good. Yeah, I would be. So let's see. Ondo has been tricky about that. The white paper clearly says that Ondo coin is a governance coin. Creating another token for RWA will bring it down. Okay, so that's speculation here from Primo Viva. Although referencing the white papers, pretty sophisticated, pretty scholarly. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to leave Ondo stories and stuff kind of in the backdrop, and we're going to focus here on Bitcoin because Bitcoin is really going to tell the story of whether or not you should buy more digital assets, right? And I'm not going to make that decision for you, but I'm going to kind of tell the story. The big thing that I'm noticing is that we have been able to put in yet another higher low, right? This is really important. We've put in now our second higher low, starting with this low that was put in on November 21st of this year. And then we put in another low here on the daily chart, December 1st. And now we've just put in, as of yesterday, the December 7th low. And that low got wicked down to 87.8, but closed that candle closed at 90,300. So call it 90,400. This is this is positive, right? Not only are we getting higher lows, we are also getting, some of you might be able to guess, higher highs, right? So on Wednesday, midweek of last week, we were able to get some candlesticks to close, not just the wicks, but the candlesticks actually closed higher than the previous high. So that's bullish. Obviously, now there's a decent amount of pressure on Bitcoin to continue to perform and do something similar. And this is what investors that haven't already gotten in during this period invest, these early kind of speculators on the bottom, speculators, they're waiting to see what happens from here. Do we go ahead and put in a newer high? If so, that's going to really kind of be, I wouldn't say undeniable, but that's going to probably turn on the hyperjets for Bitcoin, at least for a while, because you have a consecutive, you have essentially a big sign that says, "Hey, the bottom's in." Right? That doesn't mean that it is, but the probability that it's not is lower and lower with every new higher low and every new higher high. So if Bitcoin can put in a higher high here and then put in another higher low, right, we might start to see investors really ramp up their allocations, and we might also see traders start to bet pretty heavy on the long side for Bitcoin. Now, with all that in mind, we have to keep in mind that there is also a chance for downside, right? Especially if we don't get a higher high here on the daily charts for Bitcoin, especially if this week kind of sees Bitcoin come back down, right? Then it's going to be, everybody's going to be coming in questioning, well, is the bottom really in? Blah, blah, blah. So just keep that in mind. Investors want to see consistency. They want to see consistent new marginal net buying, right? In order for them to be convinced to allocate more capital into an asset. This is telling a very clear story that there are marginal net buyers, right? How do I know that? Because the folks who are buying here, right, they're not selling here. There's more buyers than sellers with each passing day. And that's clearly illustrated through this. Unless this bit of price action here is completely manipulated and it's a bull trap, this is a very clear story of this is where you would want to buy. You would want to buy low, zooming out, going out to the weekly chart here. You want to buy these lows. that look pretty good. Consistently, you'd be buying in the low zone here to be able to sell in the high zone. Okay. Some pretty terrible drawing there, but said differently, looking at it more horizontally here, rather than diagonally, you would want to buy low to be able to sell high, right? So this is not rocket science, but this is what investors need to see, right? They want to know that we are here, not here, right? They want to know that this wasn't just a smaller pullback for a much deeper pullback, right? So that's what investors want to see. Now, let's maybe look at the MACD for the weekly. I'm always curious about the curling for the MACD. I don't know that I would say that this is a very significant curling quite yet. However, it is a little bit curling. You guys tell me in the comments. I guess when you really zoom into it, you do start to see that this MACD line is starting to curl. Signal line is perfectly straight as an arrow. But the big thing that we're seeing here is that we got our first, this is pretty big, got our first decelerating red histogram here. So this is good. If we can continue on this momentum, again, investors are going to notice that and they're going to say, okay, maybe I'll buy a little less gold this month. Maybe I'll buy a little less Microsoft and I'll actually go ahead and pick up some Bitcoin, maybe even go down the risk curve, check out some ETH, Solana, maybe even some AVAX, right? But this is showing investors, hey, this is actually starting to heal. I want, less risky investors are going to say, I need to see more though, right? They want to see more histograms. Maybe they want to see that decelerating increase before they get in. But this is where the early bottom speculators are looking, and they're saying on the weekly, it's telling me that at least Bitcoin wants to come back up and test some higher levels. Okay, so that's one way to read what the market is thinking. Again, as investors and traders, we're always trying to think and parse out what is the average thought that's being had by retail and by institutions. Are they thinking, as they have been for the last couple of weeks, I think this can go lower, I'm going to wait, right? Or are they thinking, man, I don't know that this is going to go much lower, I better go ahead and buy some now? That's the average thought that transition needs to happen. They need to stop thinking that price can go lower and start thinking that they're going to get left behind and price is only going to go higher from here, right? That's what has to happen. All right. The Dedum Dums. The Dedum Dums. I'm not sure how to read that name. Said, guess that's a little specific. I guess I just notice a very violent rejection off that level. Oh, he's talking about Aerodrome. Okay. I don't know that I'm going to look at Aerodrome. Daniel Pearson says Bitcoin higher lows is good news. It absolutely is. Yeah. Good. Seeing some excitement for Aerodrome, a fantastic altcoin, in my opinion, one that I hold. So nothing against Aerodrome. It's just, I don't want to drill too far into something so specific because I try to tell the story as zoomed out and as macro as possible. With that said, we won't completely leave the altcoins behind. We talked about Ondo a good bit. Let's take a look here at Ethereum. Ethereum, right off the bat on the weekly, seeing a little bit more aggression here in the weekly red histogram deceleration. I like to see that, and so do investors. That's going to catch their eye. This is a little bit of a curling here for the MACD line, but I wouldn't completely subscribe to that quite yet. I think we need to see a little bit more of a defined curling. By the way, for those of you who are just joining in, when I say curling, what I mean is an early signal in the MACD. The MACD is a lagging signal for the crossing, but for the curling, it can actually sometimes be a front-running signal. That's not a signal that you have to trade on, right? But that's something that I like to pay attention to. It's very simple, very zoomed out, especially on the weekly. If you start to see the weekly curl, which I would not call this too much of a curl quite yet, it's more of a bowing, right? It's more of like a general kind of, it's not a curl, right? It doesn't classify as a curl for me, but we are getting the histograms moving in a good direction. So I like to see that. So do investors. What you have to be careful with curling is this was a decent curling here, and then it uncurled, and then it recurled, and that ultimately led to the cross there. Okay. Hopefully, I'm not confusing people more than I am helping them. We found good support here for Ethereum on this previous kind of support block that I had drawn out right around 27. This was a number that Jordy Vischer had written out back here. He said, when we get a weekly candle to close above 2,700 for Ethereum, then we're going to go. He was right. So I think that this is a level that's important. And it's very interesting that this is kind of around the zone. I mean, the weekly candles closed at 28, but the wicks came in down as low as 26.2, and then this one came right into that 27 zone, and that kind of marked a bit of the bottoming there. So this looks pretty good for Ethereum. Again, investors need to see this, they need to notice it, and this needs to be more attractive than AI stocks. At this point in time, I do think that a lot of folks are thinking, hey, crypto might actually be that play to go hang out in. It's so oversold. And a lot of folks are thinking that the bottom might be in for it. I'm going to take some profit on Palantir. I'm going to take some profit on NVIDIA. And I'm going to go hang out in the crypto stock, the cryptos, and the altcoins, and just have some capital there and start to think of crypto as my high risk, high reward play as I kind of unwind out of AI. Now, not all investors are going to be thinking that way. Definitely not all, but that can be kind of a changing of the mind of the average investor, average trader in the markets. All right, we had some breaking news a little earlier that I didn't have any tweets and that weren't in my notes, and I won't show this, but Tom Lee's BitMine, he bought 138,000 Ethereum worth just under $450 million worth of Ethereum. So Tom Lee is continuing to get folks to loan him money so that he can buy Ethereum. That's really, really good. Really good. Man, Tom Lee has also predicted that we could see Bitcoin come back and put in an all-time high even this year. We've got the better part of a month to do that. So I wouldn't say that I definitely wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's interesting. I don't know that I would subscribe to that just yet. Let's see. White House advisor Hassett says President Trump will announce a huge positive economic news today. That's interesting. Hopefully it's not bearish news that he's going to put tariffs on. The fact that it's coming from Hassett's kind of being painted as the new Fed chair. If I'm Trump and I'm choosing the different members of my administration to put bullish or bearish headlines on, I wouldn't choose Hassett to be the one to kind of foreshadow a bearish headline, right? Or maybe that's the 4D chess that they're trying to play today. So, but either way, Trump will break huge amount of economic news today, says Hassett. He does say it's positive news, so that's generally good. So we got the big DATs, the digital asset treasuries, buying Bitcoin today. Michael Saylor bought Bitcoin. They announced that. I don't think that made it into my notes. That announcement came out a little after I published my notes, the morning sentiment. But then Bitminer also bought crypto, bought Ethereum. Seeing another headline here. I'm not showing it on my screen. That's okay. Chainlink saw 12 new integrations across Base, Bitcoin, BNB, Ethereum, MapleStory, and Tron, Solana, Ton, Polygon. So Chelena. I don't know where that word came from. Chainlink continues to build, continues to gain significance. All right. Cool. Well, I think we can probably go ahead and leave it there. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, if you found this to be valuable to get you ready for the trading day or to kind of evaluate maybe where you would want to try to allocate this week for your crypto holdings, then go ahead and smash the like button and also consider subscribing. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about the 4-year cycle? Because pretty much everybody who I respect, by the way, I said pretty much, there's still some people that I respect their analysis, but pretty much all the analysts that I respect are saying that the 4-year cycle is over. This is coming to my mind because I'm reading right here. Bernstein uh, says Bitcoin has broken its historic 4-year cycle and is now entering an extended bull phase into 2026. Okay. Now nobody knows the future, but I can't name a single analyst um, that is saying that the 4-year cycle is definitely intact, right? I don't know that there's a lot of folks that are saying that. So I think that there's some folks that are undecided, some folks that are on the fence, kind of giving a percentage that they think that maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I don't know that a lot of people are sitting here saying, nope, the 4-year cycle is definitely intact. What I will say is that my kind of 2 cents on it is I don't think that the 4-year cycle matters anymore. I think it's broken. I think the traders and investors are leaving that in the past, and it is no longer relevant to the future. So you have to take that information with what in the way that you can. One reason why I think that that actually makes a decent amount of sense in terms of the price action recently is that if you think about it, if I've been a whale in crypto or in Bitcoin, or if I've just been a Bitcoin trader and investor, and I am starting to hear my favorite analysts and newsletter writers and things like that say that the 4-year cycle is broken. Well, suddenly I now am taking one of the easiest investment thesis, short and long, of the last 10 years, uh, and it's now been invalidated. Okay. Is that net good for me as an investor? Not as a Bitcoin loyalist, not as someone who's a fan of Bitcoin, but just as someone who looks at the charts and buys low and sells high based on history. I'd say that that's actually a net loss. It's net scary, net uncertainty for people who've been arbitraging that easy 4-year cycle trade. So now that folks are saying that the 4-year cycle is over, there's a bit of uncertainty that creeps in, right? And so that could kind of explain a little bit of this pullback that we've seen since those early October highs to where we are now. I think a lot of folks are just saying, "Hey, let me just sit on the sidelines as this whole 4-year cycle debate plays out." And it looks like it has. There was also a decent amount of OG whale selling all through here, right? That kind of created almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of the 4-year cycle. And so it kind of makes sense to me that there was a drawdown. What doesn't make sense to me is that there was such an exaggerated drawdown. I would have expected more of like maybe 100, maybe dipping into 95 as oversold. That's kind of what I was saying throughout my analysis of the 4-year cycle leading into the fall, was that I wouldn't be surprised if we have a drawdown of people who still believe in the 4-year cycle selling and walking away because they think the bear market is next. I didn't think that we would see so much of those folks that we get almost a 37% drawdown. So I was a little surprised by that. I think a lot of investors were too. There's definitely a decent amount of speculation that kind of Tom Lee has championed a bit, that on October 10th, when we saw a big spike to the downside, there was some organization. It would have had to have been a pretty large organization back here on the 10th, that they were on the wrong side of the market, and they maybe you could say they became a problem, a systemic problem, and maybe there's been some efforts to conceal that they've been in a big problem. And now that they have offloaded whatever assets they had, probably some Bitcoin, now they're in a more, let's say, solvent position. Now there's a bit more of a bullish case to be made. But if you're in the know and you're somebody like Tom Lee who maybe knows a name, or you're even closer to that inner circle of the organization or organizations that were burned by October 10th, maybe now that the selling pressure is probably not going to be present anymore, and so you're buying. But maybe you're not in that inner circle like me, right? And you don't know who it was that got burned, and so you're a little more hesitant. It's like, well, are they really done selling to be able to cover their costs, to be able to remain solvent, or is there more selling to come from that big whale? Probably a bigger exchange with some speculation by David Bailey over the weekend on the Scott Melker podcast. You're getting a lot of value here towards the end of the episode, so make sure you smash the like. Or maybe it was, some large sovereign entity that had been purchasing a lot and they got, on the wrong side of a leveraged kind of swing trade or something like this. I don't know. That's a little bit out of my league. But ultimately, I think that Bitcoin is what it is. It is the future of gold. It is the future of finance, the future of store of value. And so I'm not worried about it over the long term. And I'm not worried about it in the midterm either, because if the price goes lower, I'm just going to buy more. But what I am thinking is, okay, for all the folks that value my opinion, how can I lead them in the best direction? So continue to tune in. I will continue to give you my thoughts on this. We'll end with this. Warrior said, Ken said, I think there's multiple reasons why the cycle and bull run are changing / broken. I don't think there's any one thing. And then Warrior said the business cycle has been dramatically different due to the last admin finance debt for longer. Yeah, that's true. Janet Yellen totally messed things up. What we are seeing in my mind is Bitcoin being opened, so more people through the ETF, and that has drove prices higher. Yeah. And then Daniel said his bags are filled with link. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Adios.